I stood there on my own porch, breathing in the crisp mountain air, fumbling with what should have been the easiest part of my entire weekend. But this wasn't weather warping the old latch. This lock was new, shiny brass where my old tarnished deadbolt had been for a decade. Through the front window, I caught sight of movement inside. My stomach lurched. There were people in there, several people, with suitcases spread across my cedar floors like they just checked into a resort. Behind me, rapid footsteps crunched up my gravel driveway. I turned to see Rebecca Warren, the ever-smug vice president of our HOA, charging uphill in designer wedges. One glance at her face told me she hadn't planned for this. Her eyes were wide with something that looked a lot like panic. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice climbing an octave too high. I should back up. My name's Nathan Brooks, and I own a modest 2-bedroom A-frame up here in Timber Hollow Reserve, a gated mountain community tucked about 3 hours north of the city. The place isn't fancy. It's an old family cabin I inherited from my grandfather, complete with creaky floorboards, a stone fireplace, and a porch that looks out at nothing but pine forest and stars. I use it maybe 5 weekends a year, whenever the corporate grind and highway noise get too loud for my sanity. When I inherited the cabin, it came with the HOA. Not my choice, but tolerable, until Rebecca Warren weaseled her way onto the board. In 2 years, she turned our easygoing community into her personal power trip. She fined people for leaving wind chimes up past dusk. She measured grass height with a ruler. Once, she threatened to have a family evicted for painting their door a shade of blue she hadn't approved. I'd avoided her nonsense because I rarely stayed long enough to violate anything. My cabin sat at the far end of Wild Fern Trail, bordered by national forest, private, quiet, exactly as Grandpa meant it to be. That Friday morning, I drove up to catch the last warm days before winter, planning to chop some wood and drain the pipes before the snow came. I'd stopped at Granger's general store for supplies and joked with old Stan Granger about the early frost. But now here I was, locked out while strangers watched TV in my living room, and Rebecca stood frozen like she'd seen a ghost. "You're not supposed to be here," she repeated, her tone so brittle it might shatter. "You were, according to the records, you." I cut her off. "The records say what, Rebecca?" I kept my voice calm though my pulse thundered in my ears. Inside, a man noticed us through the window. A moment later, the door swung open and a tall guy about my age stepped out, confusion etched across his face. Behind him, a woman and 2 kids peered over his shoulder. "Can I help you?" he asked, glancing between me and Rebecca. "I'm Nathan Brooks," I said, extending my hand out of habit. "I own this cabin." The man blinked. Twice. Then color drained from his face as anger crept in to replace the confusion. "That's impossible. We rented this place through Alpine Getaways. We paid $2,000 for the week." He fumbled out his phone, thumb jabbing at an email confirmation. "See? Spruce Hollow Luxury Cabin, managed by RW Community Services." I turned slowly to Rebecca. "RW, Rebecca Warren." Her lips trembled. "This is all a misunderstanding. A simple administrative mix-up. If you just come over here and talk privately." "Nope." I stepped closer. "We're talking right here. You changed my locks and rented out my property without my permission." The family listened, eyes widening by the second. The man, he introduced himself as Daniel Lee, shot a look at Rebecca that could have burned a hole through steel. "Wait, you're saying this isn't a legal rental?" "It absolutely is legitimate," Rebecca squeaked, her polished facade cracking. "The HOA has the authority to manage abandoned properties per Article 14, Section 3. Vacant properties can be designated for community use." "Abandoned." I barked a laugh, so sharp it startled her backward. "I was here in August. I pay all my HOA dues, my taxes. I even tipped the snowplow guy at Christmas." "How was that abandoned?" Rebecca straightened, summoning whatever fake composure she had left. "Your property wasn't maintaining adequate occupancy. An empty cabin invites vermin, wildfire risk, squatting. It drags down surrounding property values. I was protecting. That's the biggest load of nonsense I've ever heard." I pulled out my phone. "And it's illegal. I'm calling the sheriff." The moment those words left my mouth, Rebecca paled 3 shades and started waving her manicured hands. Nathan, there's no need to escalate. We can refund the Lees their payment and resolve this quietly. Daniel wasn't having it. We drove 6 hours for this. My kids missed school today. We booked time off work. You scammed us into renting someone else's house. As Daniel and Rebecca argued, I stepped away and dialed 911. The dispatcher promised a deputy was already on patrol nearby. Next, I called my lawyer, Lila Fernandez, who picked up immediately despite it being Saturday morning. When I told her what happened, she actually laughed. Nathan, please tell me you're kidding. I wish. Good. I've been itching to sink my teeth into your HOA since they fined my brother for parking his truck crooked last spring. By the time Deputy Kyle Mason pulled up, the driveway looked like a block party. Neighbors had gathered, whispers floating in the mountain air like smoke. Behind Rebecca, her last-ditch backup arrived. Derek Holt, the HOA president. He was a second-rate real estate agent who treated Timber Hollow like his personal fishing pond for clients. I gave Deputy Mason the full rundown while Derek hovered nearby, looking like he'd rather vanish into the pine trees. Let me get this straight, the deputy said, jotting notes on a small pad. Ms. Warren here changed your locks, listed your cabin for rent without your consent, and pocketed the money through her company? Rebecca jumped in, voice shrill again. The HOA had the authority, but Derek cut her off, inching a step away like she might explode. Rebecca, what exactly did you do? She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin high. I implemented the vacant property initiative we discussed last spring. These cabins go unused 90% of the year. It's wasteful. I simply repurposed them for the community's benefit. Derek's jaw dropped. We brainstormed the idea. We never approved it. We definitely didn't authorize changing locks or forging rentals. Deputy Mason turned to me. Mr. Brooks, do you wish to press charges? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Rebecca sputtered, her arms flailing for words. I acted for the greater good. The rental profits were being deposited. Oh, really? I snapped. Then why was the booking under RW Community Services and not the Timber Hollow HOA? And that's when she made her fatal error. Rebecca spun on her heel and sprinted, or tried to, toward her Lexus at the end of the drive. Deputy Mason didn't even break a sweat. He just called, "Ma'am, stop right there." She froze mid-stride like someone had yanked her by an invisible leash. The next 2 hours blurred into a flurry of statements, neighbor gossip, and 100 phone calls. Daniel and his wife were furious but grateful when I insisted they stay at the cabin as my guests until they sorted out a refund or alternate lodging. I wasn't about to punish them for Rebecca's insanity. Meanwhile, Deputy Mason read Rebecca her rights and walked her to his cruiser. She still tried to protest between sobs. You don't understand. I've done this for months. The Peterson Chalet, the Gibson's place, even the Clark's cottage when they went to Europe. It's a service to the community. Derek turned so pale, I thought he'd faint. Did she just admit she's done this to other homeowners too? The investigation that followed was so thorough, it almost impressed me. Detective Hannah Chu, no relation to me, from the county sheriff's fraud unit, dug deep into Rebecca's paperwork. What she uncovered made local news for weeks. Rebecca hadn't just hit my cabin. She'd secretly changed locks on 5 other rarely used homes. She forged HOA board approvals, created false maintenance tickets, even fabricated emergency pest fumigation excuses to keep owners away while she rented the places under her side company. The paper trail was neat, too neat. It showed she pocketed over $50,000 in rental fees across 8 months. Detective Chu shook her head during our last interview. She kept immaculate logs, almost like she was proud. Every payment, every fake invoice. She even paid herself maintenance stipends. Textbook fraud. Each property owner was notified. A retired couple found out their cabin had been rented to 4 different families while they wintered in Florida. A young teacher learned Rebecca had double-booked her place and blamed water damage repairs when the owner got suspicious. When the district attorney, Monica Alvarez, made her press statement, she didn't hold back. Community trust is sacred. Ms. Warren abused hers to line her pockets. Timber Hollow deserves better. The trial didn't drag. Rebecca's attorney tried spinning it. She misunderstood the bylaws, thought she was within her rights, blah, blah, blah. The jury wasn't buying it. The shell company and forged signatures killed any notion of innocence. I testified about finding strangers in my cabin. Daniel and his wife described being duped. Derek and the HOA treasurer testified about how Rebecca manipulated the board's trust. It was ugly but satisfying. When sentencing day came, the judge didn't sugarcoat it. Ms. Warren, you betrayed the very neighbors who trusted you. You misused authority and violated property rights for personal gain. I have no patience for this kind of fraud. He gave her 3 years in state prison, eligible for parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay back every victim, over $65,000 total once legal fees and damages were added. The look on her face? Pure disbelief. She really thought she'd get a slap on the wrist. 3 years, she gasped, clinging to the defense table. I was helping the community. These houses were empty. The bailiff nearly dragged her away while she wailed about how we'd all thank her someday. We didn't. Months passed. Timber Hollow changed almost overnight. Derek and the other sane board members rewrote the rules to prevent a repeat. They added a clause requiring every major HOA decision to pass a full resident vote. They banned lock changes without court orders. They even hired an external property manager to audit every transaction. Daniel and his family came back the following summer. We sat by my fire pit one night, laughing about how they'd ended up unwilling squatters. They brought me a case of craft beer and swore next time they'd just rent a hotel. As for me, I kept the new lock Rebecca installed. It's good quality, and every time I hear it click shut behind me, I smile. Not because of the lock itself, but because it reminds me no one will ever mess with my cabin again. Last fall, the HOA threw a community bonfire. Families who barely spoke before now swapped stories about Rebecca's downfall, toasted marshmallows, and compared trail maps. Timber Hollow felt like what Grandpa always wanted it to be: peaceful, neighborly, and free of self-appointed tyrants. Before the fire burned low, Derek clinked his cider mug against mine. Nathan, you know you did the right thing, right? She thought she owned this place. You showed everyone who really does. I looked up at the starlit pine canopy, my cabin behind me, safe and quiet. Yeah, I said. This mountain was never hers to rent out. It was always mine to come home to.